Hello and welcome to the In Focus series of Drishti IAS. You must be reading about Conference of Parties under UNFCCC. You must be getting certain terms which are recurring in nature, but it might not be very clear to you what these terms mean. As Conference of Parties 27 at Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt from 6th of November onwards, it is going to be extremely significant from the perspective of your examination. The same terms that you have been studying since the past 2 to 3 years will occur to you again in your coming days, especially if you are preparing from the perspective of UPSC mains. What are these words? What do these mean? Plus, what is India's position ahead of COP27? We will know all about that. So without any further ado, let us look at these particular topics. And in important terms, there are many terms. I have not tried to make this slide very bulky, but remember there are going to be many important terms throughout. Apart from that, from the perspective of GS mains papers 2nd and 3rd, this topic is going to be important. And from the perspective of your preliminary examination, facts are going to be important. Moving ahead, first of all, let's talk about the news. From 6th of November, the COP27 will take place in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. India is being headed by the Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Where is Sharm el-Sheikh? Because it is in Egypt. Do you know it is at the southernmost tip of the Sinai Peninsula? This is important for you to know because a question you can find in your map with respect to Sharm el-Sheikh. Okay, so it is in the situated on the, we can say, southernmost point of the Sinai Peninsula. This is the Sinai Peninsula. Let's move ahead and talk about Conference of Parties. The current Conference of Parties with respect to climate change is under UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And this is the supreme or the highest decision-making body of the UNFCCC. All states that are parties to this particular convention, they are a part of the COP. They are represented through COP. And why do the parties meet? It is important to review what has been promised and what is the status of implementation of those promises, plus any other legal instrument that the Conference of Parties adopts newly. The current COP, the 27th COP, is being called the COP of implementation. That means we have made enough promises now. It's time on the ground to implement them. Also, at the COP, it is for the representatives to take decisions necessary to promote the effective implementation of the convention. Moving ahead, also other parts we have to know, then only we can answer any question with respect to COP. To review the national communications and emission inventories which are submitted by the parties. The progress of them through the nationally determined contribution is also reviewed at COP. India erstwhile had its NDCs submitted. Now in August 2022, India has revised its commitments and submitted again. Effect of the measure taken by the parties, the progress made in achieving the ultimate objective of the convention. Remember, the COP meets every year unless the parties decide otherwise. Okay, the first COP meeting was held in Berlin, Germany. Remember this. This is a very important fact. That was in March 1995. Also, remember this. Moving ahead, now the COP meets in Bonn. That is where is having its secretariat. COP presidency rotates among the UN recognized areas such as Africa, Asia, Latin America and the Caribbean, Central and Eastern Europe and Western Europe and others. Similarly, the venue can also rotate as according to the decision of the COP. Moving ahead, let's talk about the list of places where COPs, the last 10 have taken place. The current one is at Sharm el-Sheikh. COP26 was at Glasgow, where the adoption of Glasgow Pact happened. That was in November 2021. COP25 was in 2019. There is a gap of 2 years approximately. You can see this is because of the coronavirus pandemic. So that happened in Madrid, Spain. COP24 happened in Katowice, Poland. COP23, Bonn, Germany in 2017. Then you see COP 2022, that was Marrakesh Climate Change Conference. COP21 happened in Paris. COP20 at Lima in the year, of course, remember 2014. Then COP19 in 2030 happened in Warsaw, Poland. And in Qatar, Doha, Qatar, COP18 took place and the 17 happened in Durban, that is in South Africa. Alright, now let's move towards certain, you can say, terms which are going to occur in your articles of the Hindu, the Indian Express, and which are important for you to understand what is COP27. When it comes along, we will have another episode made on that. The Glasgow Pact happened at Glasgow, Scotland. This was adopted at the 2021 UN Climate Summit, and it is for the first time ever that a UN climate agreement was calling for reduction in fossil fuel use such as coal and gas, and also efforts to resolve rules guiding the international trade of carbon markets to offset emission. Carbon markets are those markets where trading of carbon credits happen. Suppose there are two companies, A and B. A says that I cannot reduce carbon emission, but I can ensure that I take place any other project in a certain country that will help in reduction of carbon. So this is kind of offsetting the carbon emission. So what happens? Even if the company has, or if any country has increased its carbon emissions in their home country, they are able to offset them by undertaking a project in any other developing country. So this is offsetting of carbon. Also, the Glasgow Pact urges nations to come up with more ambitious climate plans. Another important thing is the Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement is the successor of Kyoto Protocol. Okay. So Kyoto Protocol, after it expired in 2020, it had to expire in 2020, and in a long-term vision of that, Paris Agreement was adopted in December 2015 in order to limit the rise in average global surface temperature, ideally below 2 degrees Celsius, but preferably below 1.5 degrees Celsius as we compare them to the pre-industrial levels. Also to set national pledges to reduce humanity's effect on the climate that are meant to become more ambitious over time. That means you have to have an economy that is sustainable in nature. Moving ahead, also it is legally binding in nature, remember that, to its signatories. And it wants to collectively limit greenhouse gas emission. Okay? And this I have already told you, so no need to repeat that. Let's talk about the greenhouse effect. What is that? Greenhouse effect is basically the phenomenon where the earth actually works as a greenhouse, the atmosphere of it. It captures the heat with the help of certain potent gases, and because of that the temperature rises. So as you can see, solar radiation is coming through the earth's atmosphere. Certain ones get radiated back, but certain ones get absorbed, you can see. Now what happens, that this envelope of atmosphere has certain gases present. Carbon dioxide is important for our sustenance. Apart from that, there are fluorinated gases, methane, which have high global warming potential. So what do? They do not let the solar radiation to radiate back into outside the atmosphere, or they could capture the heat in such a manner that they are unable to get dispersed. That raises the temperature of the earth because of these greenhouse gases. So this is greenhouse gas effect. There are certain gases which are having high global warming potential. Global warming potential of fluorinated gas, nitrous oxide, methane is much larger than carbon dioxide. Okay, so you see that how much each human caused greenhouse gas contributes to total emission. This is sourced from IPCC's report 2014. Carbon dioxide is 76%, methane is 16%, nitrous oxide is 6%, and fluorinated gases 2%. This can also be because of the global warming potential of these gases. The global warming potential of any gas is the amount of a gas which captures the heat in multiples of the heat that would be captured by the same amount of carbon dioxide. So remember, the benchmark is carbon dioxide. Okay. Moving ahead, let's talk about nationally determined contributions. These are basically pledges that each country undertakes in order to reduce emission. These are, India has also done that. So first, adapt to climate change from 2020 onwards, when the Kyoto Protocol expired. Update and expand their NDCs every 5 years. It's not like you have taken an NDC for one time and then you're continuing it. Then submitted new pledges for Glasgow. Many countries such as India have submitted new pledges at Glasgow as well. What a just transition. This term is used to describe a shift to low carbon economy. The economy, whenever we are progressing in our economy, it should be low carbon in nature. The carbon footprint should be nil, or nil as in offset it or lesser. Keeps the social and economic disruption of moving away from fossil fuels to a minimum. Here is that conventional sources of fossil fuels like coal we have, like gas we have. If we have to transition to renewable energy, it can lead to disruption. Okay, that could be social in nature, such as if you are developing a huge social grid, rehabilitation can take place of people who are living there. Similarly, is for water as a renewable resources for hydro purposes. So you have to ensure that transition is happening, but it is just in nature. Rehabilitation of those people should occur, compensation should be given. Maximizing the benefits for workers, community and consumers. Everything can take place with the help of just transition. This also has to be ensured. Climate financing had to start from 2000, this concept was adopted in 2009, that every year developed countries will contribute $100 billion together each year by 2020. But this has not been, this has not been achieved. Developing countries are really pretty upset about this, okay? Because it will help the poorer countries to adapt their economies better. To lessen the impact of rising seas, more severe and frequent storms and drought, it is seen that although small island developing countries are not a part of increasing global warming, but they are at the receiving end of this problem. So remember this problem as well. Moving ahead, now 2015, in 2015 it was decided that we will give $100 billion, the developed countries, to the poorer nation, developing countries. And in 2015, they said that we will extend this plan to 2025. But we see that United States alone needs to invest $1 trillion a year to meet its new climate target. They are not even contributing enough to their own goals. Now, common but differentiated responsibility. What is that? This is enshrined in the Kyoto Protocol. It calls for a common responsibility towards our Mother Earth, but also it wants to ensure that the responsibilities are justified and differentiated in nature. Those countries which have garnered the fruit of industrial development much before the developing countries have much more responsibility as we compare to those countries which are getting developed now. Now from that only we can understand China and Brazil are roped into the global effort to cut emissions, adding the words in light of different national circumstances. That means they will take care of the emissions, but when national circumstances differ, they can also budge from their previous promises. It does not, however, require them to make any immediate pledges to cut their emissions. This is a problem. Moving ahead, now loss and damage. Poorer countries, they continue to press for an agreed basis, that is, to assess liability for the loss and damage which is caused by climate change and calculate compensation. So they want, as I said, that they are at the receiving end of the negatives of this. So they want to ensure that whatever kind of compensation could be given to them by assessing the damage and who is liable for those damages, are also being pressed. Moving ahead now, the United Nations Emissions Gap Report of 2022 paints a grim picture. It says that currently, if we go by the current policies, the temperature is going to reach 2.8 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. We promise to keep it well below 2 degrees Celsius. Emissions gap report is basically the gap that exists between the current policies and the policies that we need to adapt in order to reduce emission. So 2022 is not a very happy place. It wants the countries, collectively the globe, to reduce the you can say contribution of greenhouse gases by 45%. This is the emission cut. So India, the overall rating according to Climate Action Tracker is highly insufficient. India will become a net zero economy, you can say, by 2050. What is net zero? That means you are contributing the carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emission, but you are also absorbing it or sequestering it or taking it away from the atmosphere, right? Okay, this is what the country wants. Now, India updated its nationally determined contributions, officially stated it in August 2022. Now, first NDCs were reduce the emission intensity of GDP by 33 to 35% as we compare them to 2005 levels, and this could be adopted by 2030. Then, cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil sources were to be 40% and create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 equivalent through additional tree cover, because this is something that is going to absorb the carbon. And of course, if we talk about it, then this particular promise stays the same in the updated NDC, but these two have been changed. Now, the earlier one, 40%, has been replaced by 50%. Achieve about 50% cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil fuel based energy sources by 2030. Okay, and India now stands committed to reduce GDP emissions by 45% if we compare the years 2005 to 2030. India has also undertaken a pledge to have a behavioral change among its citizens by introducing Life Action Plan, which is Lifestyle for Environment. I will attach the link of it in the description box. You can go and see it. So, what does this want to do? It wants to ensure that India gets every citizen's behavior changed in such a manner that they are climate conscious. Whatever steps they are taking in order to live every day, these are climate conscious in nature. India will also root for it in the COP27. Now, as we move forward, we have to understand that from the perspective of your examination, this much is important. Other than that, whenever the COP27 concludes, important pointers will be provided to you through our segments and of course the Drishti IAS website. Do watch it, stay updated, and thank you so much for watching.